motives behind the junior doctors' strikes in England. The BMA this evening set more dates for walkouts over the new contract, insisting it's unsafe. Theresa May challenged that.
The government is putting patients first. The BMA should be putting patients first, not playing politics.
We've got real concerns about the safety of our patients and the future of our NHS.
Also tonight, passengers left hanging on the Alton Towers Smiler a year after 5 were seriously hurt there.
Manufacturing bounces back in the wake of Brexit. A cheaper pound is boosting exports.
And online, on the phone or anywhere, you now must have a licence to watch the BBC.
This is the ITV Evening News with Alistair Stewart and Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. The Prime Minister offered a second opinion on the junior doctors' dispute today. She said the BMA was playing politics with patients. Well, tonight, the junior doctors promptly upped the ante, announcing 3 more 5-day strikes for October, November and December.
NHS trusts are already making preparations for the first walkout, which will see tens of thousands of operations cancelled, along with 250,000 appointments. Our political correspondent Paul Brand has the latest.
If you think you've already got a picture of an NHS plagued by doctors' strikes, well, none of us have ever quite seen what's coming next. The largest walkout in history as the standoff continues over a new 7-day contract. Today, Theresa May seemed more focused on the health of the economy. The new Prime Minister promising no new tact, making very clear who is and isn't to blame.
Jeremy's been an excellent health secretary. He is an excellent health secretary. This is a deal that is safe for patients. The government is putting patients first. The BMA should be putting patients first, not playing politics.
This time the standoff means 5 days of rolling strikes, running from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. from the 12th to the 16th of September. The Department of Health expects 25,000 operations and 250,000 appointments to be cancelled, with the potential for over 1 million patients to be affected, as the BMA announces tonight it'll repeat the strikes in October, November and December. Junior doctors say that's necessary because the Health Secretary's 7-day service is unsafe.
What he's not telling the public is that there are no more doctors available, and he's not providing any more funding for any more doctors or any more services. So all this contract means is that the current services are going to be stretched even thinner than they already are.
But in July, almost half of doctors accepted the new contract, and ITV News understands the BMA's council only narrowly voted for these latest strikes by 16 to 11.
The support of the BMA Council is solid behind the decision that we've
unanimous?
taken. The support is solid.
What does solid mean? How much support did you have on the BMA Council?
It means that I'm not going to discuss the internal contents of a very long debate and discussion that we had yesterday.
You're now talking about the biggest strikes in history. Is this proportionate?
If you say we don't have a mandate for it, let us wait and see what happens on the day of the strike action.
That leaves hospitals with just 11 days to prepare for whatever's coming.
Inevitably, it will lead to significant disruption to services, to cancellations. My commitment, as always, is to provide absolutely safe and high-quality care to those patients who do come in as emergencies. But there's no doubt if you remove such an important, significant part of the workforce for 5 consecutive days, there will be risk to patients, and we'll have to minimise that risk.
This will test the NHS like no strike before, as the stalemate between doctors and ministers leaves thousands of patients in limbo too.
But it's now down to hospitals like this one to draft in consultants to cover these strike days. It is a familiar scenario, but talking to the government and to the BMA, things do feel different this time, not just because the strikes are so much bigger, but because the support of junior doctors is less certain this time, and I think ministers do sense that. The BMA may have set itself the ambitious target here of a bigger strike on a smaller mandate, and that may affect the balance of power.
Paul, thank you.
There has been more trouble for the Alton Towers Smiler ride, which seriously injured 5 people in a crash last year. 32 passengers were left trapped on the roller coaster today after a piece of debris fell off.
No one was injured in the latest incident, but a victim from last year's crash has told ITV News The ride should be closed for good. From the theme park, Peter Smith reports.
It's been barely over a year since this very roller coaster crashed at Alton Towers. Today, once again, the Smiler was brought to a sudden and unexpected stop.
We apologise for any inconvenience and thank you for your patience.
Elliot and Thomas were among those left dangling upside down and staring at a 60-foot drop.
Obviously, history, what happened last year, the colossal accident with people losing limbs, that obviously comes to mind straight away when you're stuck vertically, 100 foot in the air, how high it is. So that's the first thing. Then you just start to panic and worry.
They didn't really let us know what was happening or whether we were going to be okay or not. So
were you scared?
Yeah, we're scared, but it was definitely very painful as well on your shoulders because your whole body weight was literally resting on your shoulders.
The Smiler's only been reopened for 6 months after the crash last year, where 5 people were seriously injured and 2 needed leg amputations. Chanda Singh was one of those on the ride that day. She still suffers from physical and psychological effects. She's convinced the Smiler must now be shut down.
So many times since the first incident, so many times it's just not really on. It actually gives us anxiety just thinking about it, that somebody was stuck up there again.
Alton Towers have released a statement saying the Smiler ride was brought to a stop to investigate an incident after a piece of rubber came away from one of the carriages. In line with our safety procedures, all guests were removed from the ride promptly by staff. At no time were guests at risk. But some of those who were left hanging like this for half an hour today say they did feel at risk, especially because it was the Smiler, again, suffering mechanical problems. Well, one man who was on the ride when it stopped this afternoon told me that this piece of rubber that fell away was actually part of the wheel that in turn holds the carriage onto the track, so this was no trivial matter. And while Alton Towers is quite proud that they've managed to reopen the ride again this afternoon, I've heard many people here today say they wish the theme park would just take its time to get to the bottom of how the Smiler has run into these problems after being closed and undergoing stringent checks and just being reopened to the public only 6 months ago.
OK, Peter Smith at Alton Towers, thank you.
New figures show manufacturing output recording its biggest monthly rise for 25 years. The data suggests a new confidence in industry following the vote for Brexit and the fall in the pound it prompted, which helps exporters. But those numbers help the pound strengthen today. Our business editor, Joel Hills, joins us live. So what do you read into these figures, Joel?
Well, on the face of it, it's encouraging, Alistair. You will recall before the referendum, the Treasury Department of Government told us that if we voted to leave, there would be an immediate recession, that unemployment would soar, house prices would fall. 2 months on, Alistair, and there is not a shred of compelling evidence that actually suggests those sort of rather doom-laden prophecies are likely to come to pass. In fact, quite the reverse. Today, the Purchasing Managers Index, it is a business survey of 600 manufacturers in Britain, surged to 53, I beg your pardon, 0.3. The magic number is 50. Anything above that suggests the sector is growing. In July, the index had slumped to 48.3, fueling anxieties, of course, that we were heading for a sharp downturn. But remember, manufacturing accounts for only 1/10 of the British economy. Tomorrow, we'll get a sense of how our construction companies are doing. And on Monday, the all-important services sector will find out how that part, the biggest sector, is actually performing. And there is a but here, and it is this. We have voted to leave the EU. We have no idea yet what that looks like. The government hasn't yet told us what sort of trade deals it will be able to secure. The pound did strengthen today, but remains much weaker than it was before the referendum. It's a clear sign that as far as the world markets are concerned, perhaps wrongly, our economic prospects are actually slightly weaker today.
Joel, thank you.
A 10-year-old boy who was killed when a car crashed into his family in South London during a police chase has been described as an incredible child.
Micaiah McDermott, who was an aspiring actor, died yesterday alongside his aunt Roseanne Cooper, who was 34. The boy's twin sisters and another girl were injured in the collision. Police are questioning a 23-year-old man arrested at the scene.
A defiant Donald Trump vowed to build what he called a beautiful wall along America's border with Mexico on his first day if he is elected president. It followed what appeared to be conciliatory talks in Mexico with the country's leader. But once he was back in the States, Trump's tone on illegal immigration was as tough as ever, pledging to deport millions. As our Washington correspondent Robert Moore reports.
This was perhaps his final chance to soften his fiery rhetoric, to be tough but compassionate. But instead, this was classic Trump.
Do we take anybody? Come on in, anybody. Just come on in. Not anymore.
Uncompromising, incendiary, guaranteeing that his first priority would be illegal immigrants with a criminal record.
Day one, my first hour in office, those people are gone. And you can call it deported if you want. The press doesn't like that term. You can call it whatever the hell you want. They're gone.
And he couldn't resist a joke about expelling Hillary Clinton at the same time.
Maybe they'll be able to deport her.
And then came his tease.
Are you ready? Are you ready?
Would he really build a gigantic 2,000-mile border wall?
We will build a great wall along the southern border. We will begin working on an impenetrable, physical, tall, powerful, beautiful southern border wall.
So now we know that if Trump wins the presidency,
6:59, I checked.
we are likely to witness scenes like these on a vast scale. Immigration agents rounding up and deporting undocumented Mexican workers. Up to 11 million people could be expelled. For immigration activists like Enrique Morones, who tries to help those divided by the border, Donald Trump's policies would amount to a shocking violation of human dignity.
So could you imagine some sort of a deportation police going into somebody's house, like these families here, where the children are born in the United States, the parents maybe aren't born in the United States, and tearing them apart in front of their children? What kind of image is that for the world to see? And what kind of shock is that for the families?
In the last 24 hours, we've had Trump, the diplomat, meeting the Mexican president.
God bless you. Thank you.
But also Trump, the great divider, promising an immigration policy that would ignite ferocious legal and political battles. Robert Moore, ITV News, Washington.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News.
Yes, there's a TV set on number 5. It's in the front room. And they're watching Columbo.
Moving into the modern age, why you now need a license to watch catch-up TV on the BBC.
And powering to Paralympic glory, the kayaker going for gold in Brazil. Those stories and more after the break. And welcome back. The TV licensing authorities say it is confident most people will be honest and make sure that they've paid before they use the BBC's iPlayer service. Until today, those without a licence could watch BBC catch-up shows online free of charge.
Now anyone who doesn't pay will face criminal prosecution and a £1,000 fine. But, as our consumer editor Chris Choi explains, what can be done to catch those flouting the new rules is less than clear.
Millions of us are now watching TV on far more than just TV. An array of digital, smart and mobile devices can play BBC programmes on catch-up. For 5 years, this viewer hasn't needed a licence because he doesn't watch as programmes go out.
I probably will miss the option, but not enough necessarily to go and get a TV licence. There's enough content elsewhere online.
From today, you need a TV licence to watch BBC programmes on catch-up. The new rule covers BBC content on iPlayers, smartphones and TV streaming devices. But you still don't need a licence if you just watch things like Amazon Prime or Netflix. and you can still get catch-up programmes on services like ITV Hub and All 4 without a licence if you don't watch as programmes go out live. This is likely to be popular with millions who already pay the licence fee and who don't see why others should get a free ride. But could a shot in the arm for BBC income be a shot in the foot for its future? Today's move could alienate younger viewers. They're the most likely to use the new generation of digital devices. And there's another problem.
Yes, there's a TV set on number 5. It's in the front room. And they're watching Columbo.
First rolled out in the 1950s, detective vans were a deterrent. But can they enforce the new rule? This engineer says they could check your home Wi-Fi without breaching data privacy.
They cannot see what the data is because it's encrypted, but they can see if the pattern is similar to the one sent by the BBC, because they have that data.
Officials say existing enforcement techniques are adequate and appropriate. As we change how we view catch-up TV, it's now time for the licence to play catch-up. Well, the number of people watching iPlayer has grown. There are now more than 300 million viewings per month, and nearly half of users are aged under 35. Some now fear that as our TV habits advance into perhaps things like virtual reality, the amount of snooping to enforce the licence will also need to advance.
Chris, thank you. And for more details about the changes to the TV licensing scheme and your rights in full, go to our website, itv.com/news.
Apple's chief executive has criticised the EU ruling that it must pay a huge tax bill in Ireland. Tim Cook described the demand for a €13 billion back payment as, and I quote, unacceptable. He also said that Apple will appeal against the ruling.
Here, the government has announced a £20 million fund to improve Southern rail services. It follows months of disruption due to a bitter dispute over the role of guards and also staff shortages. But a strike next week by train guards will still go ahead.
An unmanned rocket has exploded on a launch pad in Florida where it was being tested. SpaceX blamed the blast on an anomaly and said nobody was injured.
And here the Liberal Democrats are calling for the government to introduce a 5p charge on disposable coffee cups. They say the charge would cut the number of cups thrown away. A similar charge on plastic bags reduce their use by more than 85%.
Footballing legend Franz Beckenbauer is being investigated for fraud and money laundering over the awarding of the 2006 World Cup to Germany. Beckenbauer, who won the cup as both player and manager, is one of 4 German officials facing criminal proceedings for alleged corruption. Here's our sports correspondent Ian Payne with the latest twist in the FIFA scandal.
And the winner is Deutschland.
It's becoming a familiar tale. Another World Cup tainted by allegations of corruption and bribery. This time, it's the 2006 tournament held in Germany. And among those accused this time, the most famous German footballer of them all, Franz Beckenbauer, known as the Kaiser. Swiss prosecutors today confirmed they were starting criminal charges against 4 men, including Beckenbauer, all of whom were part of the 2006 World Cup committee. The Attorney General's spokesman said today, "We are investigating whether a payment of around €6.7 million has been used correctly. The money was provided for a gala event regarding the World Cup in 2006. The Swiss suspect Beckenbauer and the others knew this wasn't the case, and the proceedings relate to fraud, criminal mismanagement and money laundering, and that the 4 men willfully misled their fellow members of the organising committee. Beckenbauer has always denied the accusations, saying they'd made a mistake but done nothing illegal. He made his name as an elegant player who captained West Germany to the World Cup in 1974. He then managed the team to success at the World Cup in 1990. If found guilty, he could be sent to prison for up to 5 years, although the proceedings in such a case could also take several years to complete. Ian Payne, ITV News.
And finally, from the dark side of sport to its most inspiring, the latest in our series looking at Britain's remarkable Paralympians. At the age of 20, Rob Oliver had to have his leg amputated after medical negligence.
He'd always been healthy and active, and the loss hit him hard. But he took up the new Paralympic sport of canoeing and found it didn't just give him a new focus, it gave him a psychological lift too. Rob told Sally Lockwood that training to be ready for Rio had made him happier than ever.
The power's in his arms. But the strength is in his will. The start line in Rio is somewhere Rob Oliver never imagined himself.
If I could go back and visit myself in hospital just before I was about to have my leg amputated and say to myself, look, you know you're going to go through this and it's going to be really hard, but this is what's going to happen and this is what you're going to achieve, I just wouldn't have believed it. And I realised I'm actually exactly the same as I was before, except I put a leg on instead of putting on a shoe.
Rob, a space engineer, broke his leg playing football at just 20 years old. Complications led to 19 failed operations. Then the shocking news, his leg was to be amputated due to medical negligence, leading to the hardest year of his life.
It was definitely aggression and anger, the way that I sort of coped with that. As soon as I got back into sport, it almost like that aggression and that was channeled.
Paracanoeing filled in the gaps his rehab couldn't. Having never kayaked before his injury, he's now European champion and British #1. And this video was filmed by his #1 supporter, his mum.
There's not a single video race that I've done that you can't hear my mum in at one point or another. She's been affected by it massively. Obviously, hopefully one day I'll have children and I never want to go through anything like that, and just seeing how stressful it was on her, but now the joy that it brings.
It brought him courage, and in Rio he's going for gold. If there can be a silver lining, Rob found it.
I almost want to use the word fearless, because that's what I feel like I am. I feel like I am fearless. Maybe my coaches think maybe too much to the extreme, but I'll always push myself to the absolute limit, and I always choose that 100% I'd have the amputation and I'd be where I am now in life.
Lovely.
The inspirational Rob Oliver on his hopes for Rio. That is it for now. Tom Bradbury will be here at the slightly later time of 10:30.
Well, from all the team here, have a very good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.